Hello everyone, welcome back to Life Groups, week number 6 in our study of the book of Daniel. We're going to get started tonight. Of course, we're not meeting in our normal life groups this week because of the coronavirus and everything that's going on, but hey, we're still having church. Hopefully you're gathered with your family and maybe a few close friends, trusted friends that are coronavirus free, and we're going to study the book of Daniel tonight. It's going to be awesome. Let's get started. So we're going to be studying one of the things that Daniel is most well known for, which is Daniel in the lion's den, where he was thrown into a pit of lions for refusing to stop praying and stop worshiping and stop serving his God. He wouldn't do it, and it ended up costing him his freedom and being thrown into the lion's den. So Daniel chapter 6, Nebuchadnezzar is no longer king, Belshazzar is no longer king, Darius the Mede is the king. So this is after the Medes and Persians have taken over and the kings of Babylon have failed and things like that. So there's been like a transition of power, which we talked about last week. So now Darius is king. In verse 1, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. Now satraps were basically governors or leaders of like a province. So 120 governors to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give an account, so that the king might suffer no loss. So you could see that Daniel was very influential, very powerful. Darius sets these 120 governors over the entire kingdom, and then he sets 3 people over those 120, and Daniel was one of those 3. So he had risen to a very influential and powerful place. So as we've seen through the whole book of Daniel, God's hand has just been on Daniel, his favor, his blessing, and so he just continues to rise in influence. He continues to rise in power, and to the point where he's one of 3 people that is over these 120 governors that Darius sets up. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps. So now he's separating himself even from the 3 that are over the 120. It's saying that he's setting himself as distinguished even among the 3. He became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Now this is amazing when you think that Daniel started out literally as a slave and an exile from Israel. That's how he got to this country. Remember, he was exiled from Jerusalem, brought to Babylon as a young teenage boy, a nobody, a no influence, no power. And now the Spirit of God is on him. And because of the way he's conducted himself and his character, King Darius is about to set him over the entire kingdom. It's an amazing story, and it doesn't tell us the whole story or all the details, but it's phenomenal. It reminds me of Joseph in the book of Genesis, the same thing that happened with him. He was in prison, and God brought him out through dreams and wisdom and interpretation and things like that as well. God brought him out, and he became the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. So God is doing the same thing with Daniel here. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Now this is almost unimaginable what we're reading right now, which is this is a political mudslinging match, really, just like we see modern day. There are these high officials. They're all fighting for power and position, and they see Daniel rising up. They can't stop him. They have no recourse. And so what do they result to? To character assassination, to trying to find something in him that they can bring him down with. Not because he shouldn't be in the position, not because they think he's unqualified, because they're jealous and they want to be in the position. We see this so much. We're so familiar with this every election season, which we're coming up on it now. You see this same thing, just the mudslinging and the character assassination, trying to bring, not because they think these people are unqualified to be in office, it's just because they're their opponents and they want to bring them down. And it's the same thing you see going here, but it's almost unimaginable that they could not find any fault or error in him. I mean, can you imagine during election season right now, not being able to find any dirt, any fault, any quote, any tweet, any video, anything on the person because their character was so good that you literally just could not find anything on them. It almost seems unimaginable, but that's what we're reading right here. It says that they sought to find a ground or complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. That's the character that he had. And these men who were so powerful, so influential, they probably had spies and money and all kinds of stuff. They could find no fault on Daniel. So it tells you the type of character that he had and the type of man that he was. So these other guys were against Daniel and they're trying to bring him down. And this is a lesson that we're going to see throughout this whole study tonight. And I hope it's one of the things that we really get in our heart tonight, is that if God is for you, it doesn't matter who's against you. And of course we know that's a biblical principle, but you're going to see that throughout this passage that these guys tried to bring him down through the political route, and then when that didn't work, then they went the religious route, and tried to get him to bow down to the king. But none of it mattered because God was for him. And so God, that's what I want us to understand as you're reading this and thinking about it, is that when God is for you, it doesn't matter who's against you. And so many times in our life, we have that situation where it seems like people are not with us, but that's really not the concern. It's really not the concern if people are helping you or they're for you or they're against you or not. You just need to make sure, is God with you? You need to make sure, is God on your side? Are you doing what's pleasing and right in his eyes? And when you are, his blessing will be on your life. So it didn't matter that these high officials were against him. It didn't matter if King Darius himself was against Daniel. God was for Daniel and God was on his side. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Then these officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors, the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days except to you shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked." Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of all the political song and dance that we see in modern day today as well. And it reminds me also that a lot of times what you're hearing sometimes in the media or the news, there's actually other stuff going on behind the scenes. It's often presented in one way. Well, here's why we need to do this, because it would be good for the American people and X, Y, and Z, and they give the reasons. But so many times the real motive is not being discussed and not being talked about. And you look at this, and this was hundreds of years before Christ. So we're talking about well over 2,000 years ago. You see the exact same types of things going on that are going on today. These men, they don't care about making 30 days where the only person that they pray to is the king and the only person who's worshipped is the king. They could care less about that. This is not a political, message, but as the people of God, we should be wise to that. And we don't need to just be simple in our understanding of politics and government and things that are going on. We need to realize there's a lot of people that are in power and in influence sometimes that the reasons they're saying that we're doing this or voting for this or going, it's not always the purest of reasons and motives. And sometimes it takes a little bit of discernment and a little bit of wisdom to figure out what's really, really going on behind the scenes. Now we get to the biggest part of our study, and that is Daniel's reaction to this edict. Because you'll remember what we're really focusing on in the book of Daniel is how to live godly in an ungodly culture. That's been our whole focus, and we get the perfect example of that. Daniel chapter 6, verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. In other words, he didn't change anything. Even though this edict came out that he was supposed to not pray anymore to his God, he was not going to fight. Now keep in mind, and please understand, Daniel did not rise to the place of power and influence in this kingdom by being a rebel and not doing anything that the king asked him to do. You understand? He got to this place of influence and power because he was a blessing to the king. The king, we just read a few verses before, he was thinking about putting him over the entire kingdom. You don't put somebody over your entire kingdom that's constantly bucking your authority and constantly doing things that are against your will and your desire. Daniel was a tremendous blessing to King Darius. So this is an isolated instance. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, Daniel was working with the king. He was working for the king. He was doing everything in his power and his character to accomplish the king's goals and visions. There's this one instance, though, where the king told him to do something that violated his conscience and that violated the word of God. And he said, no, I cannot participate in that. I will continue. Why? Because I'm more submitted to God than I am to King Darius. So as the people of God, that as long as it's possible and as long as we can, we should work with our government. We should serve our government. We should be partners and team with our government to accomplish things. The only time that you see the people of God rebelling and God being for it is when the people of God are asked to violate the word of God. And if we are put in that place where we have to make a choice between government and God, we're gonna always choose God. But I love this because Daniel didn't change a single thing. The edict comes out and he goes, no, I'm going to continue to pray just as I always have. And he's going to leave the results up to God. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He just says, I'm going to keep praying and we're going to see what happens. I'm going to trust God. Well, that's exactly what these men that were conspiring against Daniel, that's exactly what they were hoping for. So verse 11, these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. So right now they are feeling pretty smart. They are thinking, this worked out perfectly. This was too easy. We manipulated the king. We got him to sign the injunction. We come and find Daniel. He didn't stop doing what he was doing. Everything is playing perfectly into our hands. And so they're feeling really smart right about now. Spoiler alert, if we fast forward a few verses, they and their whole families are eaten alive in the den of lions. But I'm just we'll get to that in a moment, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out here. Just kind of cut ahead for a minute. Now the king loved Daniel, as we already have established. He trusted Daniel. So he was mortified when he heard this because he knew he'd been caught. And I think it's about right at this moment that the blinders started to come off and to realize what was really going on here, because when he sees what's going on, the light bulb is going off and he's going, oh, what an idiot I was, because these men came. He's starting to see the manipulation. He's starting to see everything that was really going on behind the scenes now. Verse 14, then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. So they're reminding him, because they can tell that he's trying to figure out how to get Daniel out of this predicament. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Now, the whole way that the king is reacting should again show us the character of Daniel. Why does this king care so much about Daniel? Daniel started out as a nobody. I mean, sure, he can interpret dreams, and he's done a lot of cool stuff. But when you think about the absolute power that these kings had back in these days, you would, what is Daniel? Why does he care? So what that he loses one of his governors or one of his wise men? He's got 100 more. But you can see the true blessing that Daniel must have been to his life for him to stay up all night fasting. I mean, we are talking about a kingdom that has a pit of lions just on standby, willing, ready to throw people in and have them eaten alive at the first little sign of disobedience. So it's not like we live in some democratic, humane society. This could be a pretty vicious place. I mean, the king before threw guys in a burning fiery furnace when they disobeyed. So this is not like the civil environment that you might be normally thinking of. These are pretty vicious people, and yet this king is losing sleep and staying up fasting and praying because he doesn't want Daniel to die. And so I think it just shows the amazing favor of God and blessing on Daniel's life that he was to this king and those around him, and that the king didn't want to lose him. He was valuable to him. Then at break of day the king rose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm." Can I just say that our God is able to deliver us from whatever situation we find ourselves in? Right now, I don't know what week this is going to be shown and where we're going to be at with the coronavirus when this, actually goes out. Our God is able to deliver us. And our president has called for prayer and fasting. Our governor has called for prayer and fasting. So we have leaders that are asking God to get involved. The church is praying and fasting. So if God can deliver Daniel from a pit of lions and shut the lion's mouth, I think he can deliver us from a simple virus, and from whatever else comes in our life. So we need to trust God and believe God. And this is the same situation that we've seen throughout the book of Daniel, which is just do what's right and leave the results up to God. Trust that God is big enough to take care of you. And that's what we see Daniel doing. He just did what was right, which was continue to pray, and God delivered him.